So there's two companies that I've been eyeing. The first is Atomic, which is started by this guy named Jack Abraham, and he has launched maybe 10 different startups, one of them being Hims, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. But the more interesting person is this guy named Josh Kushner. Kushner, his brother, everyone might know as Jared Kushner. He's the guy who was on Trump's cabinet. Josh Kushner's married to this model. What's her name? Carly Kloss, I think. So he's like have quite of a fascinating lifestyle or fascinating life. But he started a small fund. He was born into a wealthy family, so he had money early on. Invested $400,000 into Instagram, made a significant sum from that, and then has since not invested in companies through his fund, but really started them. And one of them, or he has two of them. One is Oscar, which just went public, and his stake in that is 1.2. The other one is Cadre, I think it's called, which is a rich person's investment platform. But what do you think? And the reason I brought this up is because you kind of had that experience a little bit. Like your Bebo was kind of a startup studio. Do you like this model of starting companies and operating them, but doing more than one at a time? Or do you think that just passively investing is better?
Okay, so the thing we did, which was it was called Monkey Inferno. Bebo was one of the companies inside. Monkey Inferno was definitely a studio, and in fact, before Jack started Atomic, we met up in our office, and he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this studio. Tell me everything you've learned, good and bad, about running the studio, so I can kind of learn from those mistakes." And I told him, "Hey, like here's what I think is great. Here's some of the things I think that trip us up. If I was you starting from scratch, here's how I would do it." And then he took that and he took.
Wait, so Jack came to you?
Yeah, he came to our office and we hung out and we brainstormed, and I kind of told him, "Look, these are the strengths and weaknesses of the studio model. How are you planning to do it?" And to his credit, what he had as an idea coming in was already the exact advice I was recommending. And so it's not like, oh, I told him you should do X, Y, Z, then he went and did it. He was already planning to do it that way. But yeah, and at the time I was like, good luck, because very few studios, there are many, many studios. A studio is like, the reason studios happen is like successful entrepreneur wins, they take some of their lottery winnings and they're like, all right, fuck it, I'm going to do a studio this time because I can't pick one idea and I just want to do a bunch of shit. I want to do a bunch of cool things. And like, now I have my own money. I don't need other investors so much, or I can easily raise money from investors because I have this big reputation. And so you saw, Garrett Camp, the co-founder of Uber, he starts a studio. Mark Pincus, the founder of Zynga, he starts a studio. Kevin Rose, that sold his company to Google, then he starts a studio. Michael Birch does Bebo, sells it to AOL. He started the studio that I ran. There's a whole bunch of these guys that do this stuff, and very few of them have success. We didn't have any breakout wins. Garrett Camp from Uber, he didn't win. Mark Pincus, he didn't win. Kevin Rose, he didn't win. So there was, for a long time, there was literally zero like breakout winners from studios. And recently there's been a few that have worked. Atomic has had a few that have worked. Hims is like the big win for them. It's a public company now, I believe, and a multi-billion-dollar win that they incubated in their studio. Then there's the BarkBox guys. So I think their studio is called Pre-Hype. So they took BarkBox public, and they've done very well. And I think they also have Row, which is a competitor to him. So now there's been a few, like there's somebody got on the scoreboard. So it definitely can work. I would say the odds are that studios
this guy Thrive.
And now Thrive with Oscar going public is great. And so I would say the odds are still, it's just like startups, where it's startups, 90% of startups, fail. Similar odds with the studio. It's not like you get that much better. I would say a couple things. Super fun to do, because who wouldn't want this? It's like an entrepreneur's playground. You get to go to work, dream up ideas. You have a bunch of teams that are building them all in parallel. In theory, you're killing the losers and you're doubling down on the winners. And you're just being super creative every day. So it's like the dream job. Then do you actually increase your odds of success? On one hand, yes, because you're getting multiple shots on goal. You don't have all your eggs in one basket with one idea. The second thing is that you're learning pretty rapidly. So you're learning from all these different reps, these different attempts you're doing, and you're keeping the team together. So like when a team, even if you fail, the team retains those learnings and just applies it to the next project right away. Whereas in a normal startup, if you fail, it's like everybody goes and gets a job for 2 years because now you just did this thing for 3 years. It didn't work. You're in debt. You need to go make some money. And so typically the team breaks up and goes and does something else. In this case, the team sticks together. The learnings are retained. So that's what's good. The bad part, which I think is what you're going to focus
But
on, the big but of this whole model that I think is what makes it not a great idea. If you're optimizing for success, I don't think this is the best way. Is you're not focused because you have multiple ideas, and one of the key things in life is focus and laser focus on making something successful. And the second thing, which is kind of related to that, is like shiny object syndrome. Every project goes through like kind of periods of plateaus. Like I remember with the hustle, you started off with the events, and then you started the blog, and then like there was a moment, I remember our conversations where you were like, the blogs are bringing in a bunch of traffic, but I don't think this is working. I need to figure out something else. What if I did this daily email newsletter, right? You were like trying to figure out, what do we do? Is it video? Is it this newsletter? What is it? And in a studio, when that happens, when you plateau or things just stop working or growth stalls, it's super easy to, instead of being like, fuck, how do we find a way out of this? What can we try to make this work? It's really easy to be like, hey, what about that other idea that we're doing? Like that one's still super exciting. It's not in a plateau right now. So you just like unconsciously start to spend more energy on the thing that's not stuck. Cause like who wants to stay in a fucking stuck project? But as an entrepreneur, you have no choice. You told everybody, you told your investors, you told your team, you told your mom, I am building this, and you have to find a way. And that's like the most valuable thing a startup has, is that like the do or die situation for a startup. And I think a studio takes away the do or die mentality, because it's like, do this or do that or do that or do the other thing. And so you have all these options, and those options actually, they actually take away your biggest asset as a startup. So I would say, if you're going for fun, studios are dope. If you're going for success, I think that going like dabbling and picking a startup to go all in on is a better model than trying to run a studio with multiple projects.
And that's actually what I remember what I spoke to you about years ago when we started hanging out at Monkey Inferno. Is I don't remember which one it was, Blab, Bebo, one of them. Like it seemed pretty good, but like every business, there were some problems where you're like, people are coming, but we're getting hacked, or I don't remember what the problem was.
Yeah.
Or it was like kind of good, kind of bad.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, just figure it out. And I actually thought that you were for part of me was like, oh, Sean's at this great place where he can do anything. He makes money and he has an unlimited budget. He can do anything. I actually think that hurt a lot of times. And it would have been a little bit better if it was like, look, if you don't figure this out, you're fucked. You're broke.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think you called it for what it was. Like really early on, you were like, dude, I think having everything, right? We had like a fucking private chef. We had the dopest office. We had all the engineers we needed. We had unlimited funding and runway. We could just keep going. And you were like, dude, it's going to make you soft. Like, having all this shit is like not good for you. I remember you like pointing that out really early on. And then also like, just pick one of these and stick to it. Don't get distracted by having a lab or a studio where you have all these different things going on and you're just dividing up your attention 20% here, 30% here, 10% here. And like, what if you just put 120% into like the one and you just found a way? I remember you saying that stuff.
But it seems really fun.
It is.
And when it works, it's like, oh wow, it worked. And it's fun, and that's what I'm seeing when I mean, I don't know these guys, but from an outside perspective, and I'm sure it sucks on the inside, just like everything else has pros and cons. It seems quite fun. It seems really exciting to be able to win big and have multiple shots on target. It seems really interesting.
So one thing, by the way, one thing I think Atomic did good, that they changed the model. So I told him, I told him about these problems, and he was like, yeah, we're going to do it differently. He's like, we're going to only do one project at a time. That team is do or die on that project. He goes, they have 9 months to raise their Series A. And if they can't raise their Series A in 9 months, they're out. Like, you're out of a job. And he's like, in reality, we're going to keep the good people. We're going to offer them a job on the next one. But like, it's not a given that like, oh, if this doesn't work, no problem. Like, just work on this other thing that we're doing. And he's like, that's going to have urgency. That's going to have focus. They're not going to split their time between different projects. And he's like, I'm going to be the CEO of the project, like that we're doing. And the other big thing was they weren't going after consumer. Like we were doing consumer and like social apps, which are lower odds of hitting the lottery. Whereas he was like, yeah, consumer's super hard. It's just really hard to, the consumers are fickle. We're going to do B2B. And so that they started doing only B2B stuff for a long time. And Hims was the one kind of like consumer hit that they've had. The other things that they've had that have done okay are B2B companies, which I think are a smarter model to do. eFounders is a great example of one of that's working in Europe, where it's like they only do SaaS and they really focus on problems that they know that are in the B2B space because their own companies have this problem. So then they build a product for that and they make a company out of it. They've had big hits like Front came out of that and different things like that.
Well, Rocket Internet does it as well, and they're tens of billions of dollars worth of value that they've created. But the best example of this, my favorite actually, and I just realized this as we were talking, is Kevin Ryan. Kevin Ryan is someone who I admire, and I joke that we kind of look like he's probably 30 years older than me, but I tease that he kind of looks like I look like him. We kind of look alike. And he was the 20th employee at, I forget what it was called, but it was DoubleClick. It was called DoubleClick, and it was sold to Google for multi-billions and eventually became Google AdWords and AdSense. And he told me that he made around $20 million when he sold it, which is definitely a shit ton of money. And then using that, him and this guy named Dwight would invest $300,000 and give a company 6 months to show traction. And the outcome of their companies, there's a couple losers and a couple winners, or probably a lot more losers than winners. But the first one is MongoDB, which is currently publicly traded at a $21 billion valuation. The second one is Business Insider, which is probably $1 billion. It was sold for $500 million, probably worth a lot more now. The third one is Zola, which prior to the pandemic was doing hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. And I think that there's like 4 or 5 more that have been hits.
Right.
And he told me, I actually called him and I emailed him like every month for like 3 years to try to get him to talk to me. And eventually he let me fly out there and meet with him. And he told me that all he does is him and Dwight. I mean, they're wealthy, right? So they can do this, but they just come up with an idea and they just get a piece of paper and a pencil and they like write out the math. And they're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. All right, let's try to find someone to do it. And we'll give them $300K to do it. Now, this sounds like a very simple process, and it might be simple, but it's still quite hard to pull off. But they've done it, and it's called Silicon Alley Insider is the name of his thing, and you'll have to look this guy up. It's really interesting.
I think that's Jason Calacanis' thing. That's not those guys, right?
No, it's they have the same name.
Oh, okay, interesting.
It's called wait, is it called Silicon Alley Insider? It's called Alley Corp. Sorry, you're right. It's called Alley Corp.
So I think there's
a Business Insider was called Silicon Alley Insider.
Interesting. So I think so there's, it's just like accelerators, right? There's like 1 million accelerators in the world. Every college has one. Every little city has one. And then you have Y Combinator that just like kicks ass. So Y Combinator is the best.
Sorry to interrupt. Guilt is the other one that he started.
Right.
Go ahead.
That's a bunch of hits. So basically you have like, it's not that is this model good or bad. It's like, how do you execute it and who are the people involved in it? So like Y Combinator is an accelerator that is probably created, I don't know, $100 billion worth of value now out of the companies that have come out of it. Easily over 100 billion, actually. Airbnb alone is 100 billion. So Y Combinator is like the best. And then you have Techstars, and then you have like all these other accelerators that like have never had a hit. And so are accelerator models good or bad? Like if you said it was bad, you'd be wrong because Y Combinator is at a hit. But if you said it's just great and you can repeatedly make success using this model, no, that's not true. I think the same is true for studios. And everyone is different because you have to make a bunch of choices. It's like, for example, are you going to do multiple ideas at once, or are you going to do one at a time? Are you going to have shared staff working across projects, or are you going to have staff dedicated to their one and they live and die with the one? Are you going to fund it indefinitely, or are you going to give it a 6-month or 9-month time period to get to some traction and raise money from external investors, or are you just going to let it run forever? Do you come up with the ideas, or do you invite in founders and they spend some time coming up with the idea like an EIR? Right? There's all these different differences that like, there's all these like little choices that will lead to a totally different outcome. It sounds like in that case, they come up with the ideas and then they find an operator. In Jack's case, he came up with ideas and he was the initial operator, and then he hires a CEO. In Expa's case, they bring in an operator and the operator comes up with the idea. And so there's all these different versions of it. And, a lot of it just depends on both luck as well as who's involved. Like truly great entrepreneurs and investors can have success where somebody else copying the same model that they have won't be able to pull it off because they don't have the right judgment. And that's why I think I failed.
And
I think I didn't have the same judgment that these guys who have had success, like with their model. I think they were better at playing that game than I was.
it also helps to be wealthy, I think, and be able to write uh 10 to 20 $300,000 checks and have the time to do it. And so I don't want to dismiss that.
But a lot of them raised money. Like Jack, he raised money. He raised, I don't know, like $100 million or something from Andreessen Horowitz and others to fund his lab. Even though he himself was like, doing super well. He had sold the company to eBay. He was like crushing it at PayPal or whatever, like or eBay when he was there. He sold his company for $75 million when he was 24.
Well, I'm not dismissing any of their skill. I'm just saying this is definitely like after you get your hit, it's a lot easier. I'm not dismissing that at all. It's like it's a lot easier to become a good golfer if you have some money to afford a fancy clubs and a membership.
And there's a bunch of people trying to do this that don't have that, right? There's a group, this guy, Bobby, he listens to podcasts. He's doing this for creators. He's like, all right, we're going to make a studio. We're going to just build products for the creator economy. And I don't think they have a big track record or anything like that, but that's their focus. They're trying to do a studio for that.
Oh, I'm not saying it's impossible.
I know another group of guys that I would bet on that. The main guy is this guy Kumar, and you should follow him on Twitter. He's amazing. He's super interesting on Twitter and Facebook. His handle is Data Raid.
I know him. I know who he is,
and he's just like really into all these alternative.
He's a weird guy.
Yeah, he's a weird dude, but he's really sharp and he's really out there, different type of thinker. And so he's like really into like the energy industry, and so he'll build like little products for the energy industry that you didn't even know like there was a need for. So I think this guy's going to do well because he knows where to sniff. He knows where to sniff out some money because he's looking at problems that the average kind of engineer in Silicon Valley or New York or LA, they don't even know these problems exist. They don't even know these companies exist. And so, he was doing one, for example, like his friend is a lawyer, and there's like all these like little rule changes in like your local regulation or your local law. And he's just made an alert system where it'll alert you about whenever this rule changes. And he can go get a bunch of lawyers to sign up for these email alerts. And it's a SaaS business that, can do well. Or, energy prices when they rise and fall. How are you going to track that? How do you build a database of that information? So he's got all these like really random ideas that I think the average entrepreneur doesn't really even know about those markets enough to know those problems. And therefore he finds kind of untapped opportunities.